Welcome. What's the most important thing you wish people knew about forgiveness? I'm Kathleen and I'm here with Maureen and Colleen. And today we're so excited. We're talking about forgiveness with Brenda Reiss, a forgiveness coach. So we're going to jump right in and then have a 30-minute conversation now. Be sure and hang out with us for the afterglow where you can join with us in the conversation. So Brenda, thanks for being here. What I'd love to learn most right away is what's the most important thing for all of us to know about forgiveness?
Well, one of the most important things about forgiveness is to know that it is a choice, the biggest thing, that we have a choice and that there is a right time to forgive and not a right time to forgive. And a lot of people don't talk about that.
I think that's so powerful. Brenda, you taught me a number of years ago that, I thought I was good with forgiveness. I thought that everything was good until I went through one of your workshops and I realized that I had unresolved issues that I hadn't forgiven. So it became the right time for me to really forgive and seek forgiveness from others. So we think that we're good, but sometimes things are in our blind spots.
Things are in our blind spots. And, so what happens is when we're trying to forgive, it gets too much, right? So a lot of times it gets too much for us. And so we bury it. We have to be able to go on. So that's that blind spot, I think, that you're talking about, is where we don't see it. So we can go on. Because naturally, especially if we're hurt when we're younger, right? We have some triggers from our younger years. And so then what happens is that when they're re-triggered, we get kind of thrown back there. It's too much, right? Because when we're kids, it's too much to handle. So that gets stuffed. And so then we think we have worked it, but we haven't. It's just kind of bare. It's in the laundry pile, right? My favorite jeans is stuffed in the bottom. So I got to clear off the top.
Brenda, this is a huge topic for end of life. And I have noticed people, sometimes they go with things unsaid on the deathbed. But I'm wondering, is it good to forgive quickly when someone is dying? In other words, you could have done it earlier, but you do it kind of at the last minute.
Well, so usually that's kind of like just trying to make it better for yourself, right? Which is important. It is important, but true forgiveness really needs to be done regardless. So it doesn't help if you, right, are all of a sudden coming to this person saying, forgive me, if it's you, right? I did something wrong, forgive me, when they're dying. But what is really better to do is to really be genuine about it, asking for their forgiveness if that's what you truly want, and also a genuine apology or forgiveness going back to them. Because, if your heart's not in it, if it's not true, it doesn't matter. Words don't matter. It's the intention behind it. Mm-hmm. And so if our energy behind it is like, I got to do this because I'm going to feel better, you're still going to feel regret and guilt and shame around it. So the best thing to do on a dying bed is, like, I had a client once, and this kind of goes into, what we don't know how that other person is going to react or respond, right? When we go to forgive, a true forgiveness is about, I need to be clean on my side of the street, and I'm coming at you going, this is how I feel, and I'm asking for your forgiveness if that's the case. And I need to be clear with my intention, knowing that they don't have to forgive me or not. Mm-hmm. But the biggest, most important factor is I'm asking for it. I'm clear in it. And I'm doing the work around it myself. Mm-hmm. Right? So I had a client who on her father's deathbed, and he was abusive, mean, nasty, all of her life. He was dying. So she's like, okay, she'd been working on forgiveness for him and with him, well, without him working on it too for herself. And she, on the deathbed, she's like, Dad, I know you think I've hurt you, and I'm so sorry. Would you please forgive me? And he said, no.
Oh, yeah,
He said, no, I will not. And so she, of course, was a little shocked. And then, she was able to kind of step back, go into the work that we had been doing around herself and go, okay, he's got to take that and go with it, because I've done everything I can. Now she got to feel the feelings, which I think is super important for all of us to know. We have to feel these feelings around it. Because forgiveness is not about just like, oh, it's all rosy, it is about knowing that we're not condoning bad behavior, that our hurt still happened, and acknowledging it and allowing those parts of us to feel it, know it, release it, because that's what it's meant to do. Our emotions are energy in motion. They're meant to go, not to hold on to. So what she was able to do was, after tears and, taking the tennis racket and beating the bed, anger, I highly recommend that exercise, by the way, was really valuable. And so, she was able to come to some peace within herself around that. And then also the other way around, too, is asking them for forgiveness. You have to be ready for them not to.
Yeah.
But be clear in your intention, that, okay, I get to do that work then. If I've hurt this person and now I'm coming to you on the deathbed real quick, like, please forgive me, or they're asking for their forgiveness, it's like, no, that doesn't work so well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. It makes a lot. And I've seen all those scenarios too work out. Happened with my father and my brother. It's happened with my sister. I mean, it's just exactly how you described it. It's so important.
It reminds me of how we're just 50% of the relationship. We can only do our side of the relationship. And then really getting to the point of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable enough to be shut down, but that then we can do the work regardless of what they did, so that we're at peace, even if the other person isn't at peace with us or on the same page. Yeah.
And that's a hard one, right? I mean, it's not, forgiveness can be, simple, right? Because like I teach a forgiveness process. So, which was a new thing for me. It's like, oh, there's a process, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy, right? Because of the stories, because of the stuck emotion, because of this, the thing is, like with resentment, it creates a construct in our mind and our heart. We become that thing, that victim, that wound, right? And so when it comes time to release that, who am I without it? Right? And so that's a huge piece for us to look at, because who am I without it is the unknown. And we're a little scared of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brenda, you said something about when there's been abuse or just really hurt. And so say if I felt like you did the unforgivable to me, and you have to take that to the grave with you, you abused me, you did this, you did that, and time passes. And in dealing with the aftermath of that, those feelings and the emotions, I'd love to hear, how does it look like? And what does it look like? And how do you forgive someone after they've died?
So this is really important, because for a lot of us, especially I'm going to say in our age group, that's happening. It's happening. And, this, you're going to have to take that. It's like saying, this is what you did to me is unforgivable. Now, granted, I understand the feeling behind that, but I also believe that nothing is unforgivable. The reason being is because I'm the one that's hurting, right? And so they're not really suffering like I want them to suffer, right? That's that intention. So them taking it to the grave with them, they're done. They're gone. It doesn't matter. And so what it looks like for the person that is left behind holding that resentment is a lot of pain and suffering.
Mhm.
You know, and it's going to show up. It doesn't just show up in that relationship. How we do anything is how we do everything. So it's going to show up. I can't be present if I'm holding a resentment. This was another really big thing that I learned that was really valuable for me about knowing what forgiveness is and isn't, is like, we can't enjoy the present moment because we've got this thing hanging over us, right? And that I'm bringing that with me. People are seeing this in front of me when they, they're feeling it, right? Energetically. And that I'm bringing this anger and resentment into every new relationship. Sometimes we don't think we are, but it's going to show up. And and it shows up in our body, right? It shows up in our health. Is that answering your question, Maureen?
Yes. I've met a woman who was physically abused extensively by her father, and he was dying, and she, because of a lot of inner work that she did, she was able to go and forgive him. It was before he died. He sort of rejected that he hadn't done anything wrong to her, but she said it was the work within herself that she was able to release it and let it go with true, genuine forgiveness. But it took her a number of years to get there when she first felt like she had to start working on this, so that when he was dying, she was able to truly, authentically say, I forgive you for the abuse that you meted out to me, and I forgive you, and I love you for who you are. And I've always just been in admiration of her. But she said, like you said, she had carried that pain and suffering into other things, and it just shifted her whole world then.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because it is powerful. And, what that has me thinking about is the fact that there's a right time to forgive and not forgive. So like calling back to that, if somebody's quickly dying, it may not be the right time. I still may be feeling my hurt. And if I'm feeling my hurt, that's not genuine forgiveness. I get to work on my wound, like you were just talking about, Maureen. I get to work on this wound first. I've got some inner work to do. And the other piece is, it's a choice that we make. That was another surprising thing for me, was like, what do you mean it's a choice? They did this to me. What do you mean it's a choice? There's no choice here, And, it's like, I was definitely not looking at it from the perspective of life happens for me, not to me, right? Because that's what I also had to learn. But there's a choice. And we get to go through that. We get to be witnessed and validated for what we've gone through. That's huge. And then the important fact is, we know, right, is to feel our feelings around, give it a safe outlet for it to have, doing that work. And sometimes on some things it can go quicker, sometimes slower. And just honoring the process and knowing and trusting that we can't force it to happen, but we sure can cultivate the soil to help the plant grow. Right? But we can't make, it's like, if we sit there and go, grow, 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 it's not going to grow.
But, and you can do this work after they've died.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what's, I think, is so important for people to realize, is that you can do this work after they've died.
Absolutely. Can I share that story about my mom? That's what happened with me, is when my mom died, it was we didn't know she was gonna die, but I was drinking pretty heavily. So it's before I got sober. And the one thing she always wanted for me was to get sober. And the last time I saw her, I was drinking quite heavily. And within 2 days after I left, she died. And so I had to deal with that regret, because there was things not said, there wasn't anything shared, and our relationship had not been the best.
Sure.
And so there was a lot of regret, there was shame, there was guilt. And through this work, it was an amazing experience to be able to, through the process that I teach, there's worksheet, there's actual tangible tools. But really what I found the best was writing that letter to her and expressing every single pain point and expressing the good stuff. I just cried, poured my heart out, screamed, I did the whole thing. And it took a couple days because it's not a one time for me, it wasn't. But really writing that letter and then burning it. Some people, it's good, like with a coach or with a therapist or something, you can read it out loud, which is really healing too, right? Because that's that witness and validation.
Yeah.
That what you've gone through. But also as you're writing, you feel it. Like I could even feel her with me, right? And then the other part of this was to write a letter back to myself from her. And that it's like, what? You want me to do what? It's like, I'm not, but you switch chairs. It's almost like you switch, and there's a lot of work that people do around this. And what came out was amazing about how she was so sorry, about not being there for me, the abuse that was suffered, the rejection, the abandonment, these kind of things. And that she's here for me now, even if she's not physically here. It was extremely powerful. And I highly suggest, some people that's not good. Some people actually need to just talk it out, not write it. Do that. Do the same thing and do it with 2 chairs. You can, talk right at that person and then you can switch chairs. Love that. And, I forget about doing that sometimes. And when I remember, it's like, oh, no wonder I like this exercise.
I remember doing that exercise at your workshop.
Yeah.
So powerful. So powerful.
Brenda, that story is so poignant. I'm glad you shared it. And my question was, then in you describing your story, it seems as though there is definitely a connection between forgiveness and grief. But is there ever a time when there's forgiveness and somebody doesn't have to grieve? Or I don't know. I've often wondered what that connection is.
Well, we're grieving a lot in our lives. We grieve on so many things that we don't call it grief.
That's right.
We call it sadness, or we call it regret, or we call it different things. But we always are suffering a loss of something. Even a little child who doesn't get their way or their toy, that's grief. Right? So we, as I've been just really looking at this forgiveness piece and grief, it was amazing to me to really start looking at our life. So taking your timeline and just kind of looking at your life, at the different things you've experienced, not just relationships, not death, but some things you've lost: friendships, time, health, money, right? Those are biggies. And looking at, do we even take the time to notice we're grieving and allow the space for that? That's where the forgiveness piece comes in. And that's where we go with self-forgiveness, because I was realizing I was disappointed in relationships. I was disappointed in choices that I made. I was disappointed in how I did things. That was being reflected outside of me too. So it's like, oh, I wasn't allowing this space to grieve. But I was having all of those, when you look at the different stages of grief, I was having all that anger, and all of that, and maybe getting to acceptance. And it's only been the last few years that I've really started to look at where I'm at in the grief process, and for all the different things, especially what's going on in the world, but also in my personal relationship. And looking at when somebody, like in a relationship, that gets a health diagnosis, there's grief. There's grief on their part. There's grief on my part. And so inside of that, I have never done as deep of forgiveness work as I have just this last year in that alone, in the health diagnosis for my husband. And going through the anger, going through the, how could you do this to me? Right? Here we go again. How can you do this to me? What's going on? you know, our relationship is different, and allowing the anger, allowing all of the regret, remorse, allowing all of that, and finally being able to go, wait a second. He's not doing this to me. He's on his own journey. He's got these things. Oh, wait. Now I can bring in compassion for myself, which actually gives compassion for him, because I cannot give real deep compassion until I can find it within myself. You know what do you guys find that too?
Yeah. And grief is such a roller coaster, and I think of it as soon as we're born, we're letting go.
Yes.
I think of it as being a mom, like the whole process is letting go. You just kind of move further and further. And then you have these moments of closeness. So, but if you're not actually willing to let go and look at it, then you're not really present for all the beautiful things and all the closeness. Because when you make a decision, you have to let go of one thing when you choose another. And so you're right. But I do think we have an aversion to it being called grief.
Well, yeah.
It's the languaging, and again, that authenticity of what does it actually feel like to you? What wording would you use? But if we can let go of resentment and righteousness and those kinds of things that are around forgiveness, you can actually just feel it in your body. So to me, I feel relief a lot of the time and not grief. I feel a tremendous amount. I think that the grief is locked. And then when you forgive, it's kind of released,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what we call it, a freedom, right? That's what you hear a lot, that forgiveness brings freedom. And depending upon what your definition of freedom is, right? Because some people will go, I don't relate to that. But a lot of people do, because we know what it feels like to be emotionally free or mentally free. When we have been in an abusive situation and we get free of it, we feel it in our bodies. We feel that difference. And it's when you were talking, Kathleen, it reminded me of, it's like when we're letting go of one thing for another, that's grief. It's loss. And I think if we could start, if people could use that definition, if they could say, oh, I'm grieving, that gives us permission, even though in our society, they don't really honor that, but it doesn't mean that we can't. It doesn't mean that we can't change the narrative by each one of us saying, I am going to take this time and grieve this moment. Our children getting older, going through the different stages. Oh my God, I don't know about you, but when my kids were getting older, and then all of a sudden now they're in their 40s, it's like, what the heck happened? It's like you look back and you go, oh my God. So there's all these pockets, and they're quick. That not a lot of them are where we have to stop and take time. But there's a lot of them that we would really benefit from. And our bodies wouldn't have to hold on to that, right? So that we end up with gut issues, heart issues, diabetes, brain issues. I mean, I ended up with needing a back fusion, a neck fusion, and I had a brain tumor, all within a 1.5 year period of time.
Wow.
And, and it was neglect on my part from my body. Now, some people will no, I don't believe that. I do. I lived it. And it was like a wake-up call for me. And so, my my nervous system being on alert most of my life, right? That's that unresolved trauma, grief, right? There were so many things when I started doing this forgiveness work. There were so many things that popped up, childhood, 20s, 30s, teen, the decisions, the choices that I made, or the things that I felt were done to me, the abuse that I suffered, that we all have some sort of, we stuff it down because we're not able to deal with it at that time. But when are we going to deal with it? Because sometimes it gets buried and we think we've forgotten. But our bodies, Doc, we were talking, our bodies don't forget, and it's that awareness of that was huge. And that's where the self-forgiveness piece really came in for me, is like, wait a second, I have to reframe how I'm looking at this for me to find any peace, because It's peace that my clients come to me for. The number one thing they say is, Brenda, I want peace. Right from the narrative in their head and how they're feeling, always just on alert. And it's amazing at when we're able, when we give ourselves permission, and you only have to be willing. Sometimes I have to be willing to be willing to be willing to do the work, but being willing and giving ourselves permission to go, let me be curious about these thoughts, these feelings, this resentment I have. Let me just start there and see where this goes.
When we think about end of life, it's just perfect to be thinking about forgiveness, because people can be a lot more present, because you're just in it, whether you chose to be in right next to the deathbed or whatever. And so it is an opportune time to be thinking about it. We've been talking about the dying process and how to die well. And we know that this is one of the top things people say that needs to happen, is to say, we love the people that we love. We ask the question if we've been loved, and we ask for forgiveness, and we want to say thank you and goodbye, in those last moments. So this is one of those top things that can get in the way of a peaceful, good death. So our hour is wrapping up. I'm just wondering, is there anything that you'd like to share? Any last thoughts of any surprises around forgiveness that would be helpful?
Well, we've talked about forgiveness, that all forgiveness is self-forgiveness. That was a big surprise to me, because remember, I came into it going, you did this to me. And then what I find is some people will go, yeah, I'll forgive. It's self-forgiveness, but they don't understand what that means. That means I forgive me for everything. And then the other surprise was, forgiveness is not just about the past. Forgiveness is about cultivating an environment of acceptance and allowance, so that we can then live the life we desire, not based on regret, not based on somebody else, based on how we want to live our life.
That is so powerful. Gosh, we could just talk about this forever. And I hope that all of you will stay on, all of you that are here will stay on for the conversation after we stop recording. But Brenda, I want you to take a minute or two, just to tell us how people can get in touch with you. What work do you do with them, and how they can reach you?
Yeah. So my website has information on it. It's got a little background, and it's got what I do and how I work with people. And that is Brenda Reiss, REISS coaching.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Brenda Reiss, and on Instagram, Brenda Reiss Coaching. I try to make it easy if you're on Instagram. At least I need it easier, I tell ya. And that's a good way to reach out. Or you can email me at brenda@BrendaReissCoaching.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions or, anything, and hop on a call. People can get on a call with me if they'd like. And so, we can talk about what it is that they're looking for. And so, and how I work with people is we go through a process. We see what the need is, what's going on, what's the story, and create a container where they can then feel witnessed, validated, see what feelings need to be felt. And then we look at a reframing process so that they can bring in that compassion for themselves and then to other people.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brenda. It's been great having you. I know we're going to want to have you back again. So we hope you guys will join us next week. Our topic this month is dying well. And next week, we're going to talk about what the active dying cycle looks like. What does active dying look like? We fear it because we don't know about it. We fear pain and suffering, and it's just worsened by the unknown. So we're going to explore that question next week. I hope you'll join us, and you can always find us on our Facebook channel at Challenging Conversations. So see you next week, and stay on for the conversation after.